It is to beat him up. Gerald looked at Kiri and smiled. When Kiri heard Gerald's words, his expression suddenly changed. However, when he thought of so many people around him, he sneered. He looked at Gerald and said, I want to see how you are going to beat me up. If you dare to touch me, I will send you to prison again. In the restaurant, the middle-aged couple hurriedly said, Young man, these people are from the Kenneth family. We appreciate your kindness, but we should not offend them. We can't afford it. Gigi rubbed her eyes. She pulled Gerald's arm and said, Gerald, don't do it. They are shameless. They will blackmail you. Kiri looked at Gerald. On the day Gerald came back, he was indeed frightened by Gerald's eyes. After all, he had done something bad back then. He was afraid that Gerald would take revenge on him, so he was scared these days. He did not even dare to return home. Last night, Kiri went to see Stephen, who had asked him to give suggestions to his family. At that time, Stephen's disdain for Gerald enlightened Kiri. Indeed, Gerald was no longer in the Kenneth family. He had just been released from prison. He had been in prison for 9 years, and he had no one in Sacramento. What was there to be afraid of? He looked at Gerald with a faint smile and said, Yes, this beauty is right. If you touch me, I will blackmail you. I will make your family lose everything and I'll send you to prison again. After that, he saw the smile in Gerald's eyes disappear gradually. Beside them, Andrew saw that Gigi was nice to Gerald. He sneered and said, That's right, Mr. Kenneth. When you want to sue him, I will be your witness. Andrew, get lost. Gigi saw that Andrew was speaking up for Kiri. Her face was filled with anger as she said, I was blind to fall for you back then. Andrew frowned and said, Gigi, I told you before that this guy used to be in prison for 5 years because he was a rapist. Even if you don't break up with me, you should stay away from him. It has nothing to do with you, Gigi said through gritted teeth. Andrew's expression was a little uneasy. He looked at Gerald fiercely and said, Gerald, do you dare to touch Mr. Kenneth today? Gerald stood there and touched his nose. Then, in the next instant, he suddenly took a big stride forward and appeared in front of Kiri. Gerald was too fast. At that time, next to Kiri, the others did not react. In almost 1 second, Gerald arrived in front of Kiri. Kiri's eyes suddenly widened. Before he could say anything, he saw Gerald's palm pressing down on his face. Gerald was so strong that Kiri was smashed onto the ground. Bang! Kiri never expected that Gerald would dare to attack him. It was too late for him to react. He fell to the ground and almost stopped breathing. The people he brought with him were stunned for a moment. None of them expected that Gerald would dare to attack Gerald in front of so many people. Moreover, he acted so suddenly and decisively. By the time they recovered from the shock, people rushed over. Don't move. Gerald held Kiri down with one hand and turned around. He said calmly, If you dare to touch him, I will punch Kiri. Kiri was hit hard, and his whole body was in pain. Hearing Gerald's words, he gritted his teeth and said, Gerald, how dare you hit me? You are finished. I will sue you until you go bankrupt. Andrew also quickly said, Mr. Kenneth, I will be your witness. Gerald did not care about them at all. He was sure that Kiri would not sue him. If Kiri did, Gerald would just make things big. The Kenneth family was powerful. If their dirty tricks in business were exposed, it, 2/5, would be a huge loss to their reputation. In fact, it was easy to solve the problem of the pancake shop, which was to make things big. So, of course, the Kenneth family would have scruples. This method also had a drawback. It was that they were afraid of the revenge of the Kenneth family. The Kenneth family was one of the largest families in Sacramento, so it was easy for them to take revenge on a small restaurant on the street. They were afraid, but Gerald was not. Gerald was eager for the Kenneth family to come and cause him trouble so that he would Find out who framed him back then. He looked at Kiri and said indifferently, if you want to sue me, just go ahead. I'm curious about who will suffer more if the Kenneth family's dirty trick blows up. Kiri's expression changed slightly as he heard what Gerald said. Now, there are two things, Gerald said indifferently. One, quickly take your dogs out of this place. If you dare to come here again, I will kill you. As he spoke, he punched Kiri's leg. He did not use all his strength. Otherwise, with this punch, Kiri's leg would be broken. However, this punch gave Kiri a lot of pain. Indeed, after Gerald's punch, Kiri screamed. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Then, Gerald spoke again calmly. Second, who asked you to suggest the Kenneth family remove my father and me from genealogy? When Kiri heard this, he could not help but tremble on the ground. Gerald's cold eyes seemed to want to eat him up. The intense pain in Kiri's legs also scared him. Thinking of what Stephen said to him before, Kiri hurriedly said, Stephen asked me to suggest. It has nothing to do with me. Hearing it, Gerald suddenly thought of something. If it was Stephen, then it would make sense. 9 years ago, Mason was highly valued by the Kenneth family. Mason managed the company very well. The family's company intended to promote Mason to the executive president. However, at that time, there was a competition system. The other competitor was Stephen. In order to suppress Mason, Stephen indeed had a sufficient reason. Gerald withdrew his hand that was pressing down on Kiri's head and stood up, saying, take those morons away. At that time, two people hurriedly ran over and helped Kiri up. Kiri did not dare to stay any longer and had his men leave. When Andrew saw Kiri leave, he frowned and said, what a coward. Then he looked at Gerald provocatively and said with a threatening tone, Gerald, I advise you to stay away from Gigi. She is my girlfriend. Gigi's face turned red. She looked at Andrew angrily and said, I said I had broken up with you. Gerald waved his hand. He didn't want to deal with these two people at all. He turned to look at the restaurant owner and said, with a smile, don't worry, they won't dare to harass you in the future. You can continue your business. The restaurant owners hurriedly expressed their gratitude. If it was possible, they all wanted to keep their restaurant. After all, they had been running a business there for so many years. And they had many customers. Gerald waved his hand, turned around, and left. He headed for the place where he was going to have dinner. Gigi looked at Gerald's back, gritted her teeth, and chased after him. Beside him, Andrew saw that Gigi was chasing after Gerald. His face was a little gloomy. His eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness as he looked at Gerald's back. Gerald walked to a restaurant not far from the school. Just as he was about to go over, Gigi's voice sounded from behind, thank you, Gerald. Gerald turned around and looked at her. He frowned and said, I go to that restaurant often. I don't want it to be shut down. Gigi pursed her lips and looked at the restaurant. She asked, are you having dinner here? Yes. Gerald nodded and said, yes, I'm eating with a friend. Do you need something? Gigi blushed. Then, she took out her phone and looked at Gerald. I think it's destiny. Sacramento is very large, and we actually meet 3 times in a row. Can I have your number and friend you online? Gerald's expression changed slightly. Looking at Gigi's pretty face, he did not refuse. This time, at first, he did not want to get in touch with Gigi. Gigi fell in love with someone like Andrew, so he thought that she was not a decent girl. But today, she was protecting the restaurant alone, which changed his impression of her a little. After getting Gerald's number, Gigi said goodbye to him. Gerald walked into the restaurant. After dinner, Audrey asked them to go to the amusement park in the afternoon, and then asked Gerald to treat them to dinner. Gerald returned home at 9 o'clock in the evening. The next day, around 7 o'clock in the morning, Mason woke Gerald up to let Gerald go to work with him. Gerald was dumbfounded. Mason said that he found a job just to satisfy his parents. Now, because they were in the same company, Mason had enough reason to let Gerald go to work with him. Gerald could not disobey, so he had to get up early, wash up, and have breakfast. Then, he went to work with Mason. When they arrived at the entrance of Universe Group, it was about 9 o'clock. Mason was actually the company's vice president. His photo was hung on the wall of the company's senior managers. So when he brought Gerald into Universe Group, the security guards did not stop him. When they arrived at the lobby, Gerald coughed and said, "Dad, just now, Mr. Hansen sent me a message to ask me to buy him breakfast. You can go up first." He decided to find a reason to leave first and then go back home to get more sleep. Mason did not doubt it. He looked at Gerald, then nodded and said, "All right, you have received Mr. Hansen's appreciation. You should study well with him. Universe Group is a very good company. It is difficult for countless graduates of top universities to be Mr. Hansen's assistant." "Will," Gerald hurriedly said. Mason nodded, and after warning Gerald a few more words, he walked toward the elevator. Only then did Gerald let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and walked toward the lobby. Just as he reached the door, he saw two people. Jacob and Benning were dressed in suits, looking very gentle. However, they were obviously not used to working in such a big company. They nervously came together. When they saw Gerald, they were stunned for a moment before running over. "What are you doing here?" Benning asked. "Do you also work here?" Beside him, Jacob cursed in his heart, "This fucking company is his." However, Benning did not know about this. Gerald touched his nose and said, "I came here for business. Why do you look like two thieves?" "It's my first time working in such a big company. I'm a little nervous," Benning said. Honestly, Jacob nodded as well. "Yeah, damn it, I still feel like dreaming right now. When I went back and told my parents that I was going to work at Universe Group, my mother didn't believe me. She said that I didn't have the qualification to work here. 1/5. It's good that you know. At least you know yourself well." At that time, a voice sounded from outside the door. Gerald and they looked over and found that not far away, Kian and Dia were walking in from the door of the hall. Universe Group allowed its employees to date, so they walked hand in hand. Dia was wearing light makeup. As the two most beautiful girls in high school, she was as beautiful as Doreen, so naturally, she was gorgeous. She looked at Gerald and the other two and frowned while Kian's eyes were not very friendly. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Right. Kian was not in a good mood. He organized a reunion on the weekend to show how good his life was now, and Jacob were the focus of the reunion. After returning, he could not think it through. But Benning, he had always felt that he was very awesome, especially when compared to his peers and high school classmate. In his opinion, people like Jacob and Benning were not worthy of being compared to him. But the reality was that Jacob and Benning were his colleagues, and Benning was at the same level as him when Benning just entered the company. But there was nothing he could do about it. This was approved by Leandro. However, when he went to the company in the morning and saw Jacob and Benning, the depression in his heart appeared again. So when he heard Jacob say that, he could not help but want to mock them. Of course, he didn't know that Jacob would become his boss in a while, and Jacob would be 2 levels higher than him. In his opinion, Jacob couldn't be as lucky as Benning. Jacob would probably start from the lowest level of the company. After saying that, he looked at Gerald and found that Gerald was wearing ordinary clothes, not a suit. Kian glanced at Jacob and Benning and said, "Do you two think that you can bring anyone to the company just because you work at Universe Group?" When he said this, he deliberately raised his voice. It was time to go to work. At the entrance of Universe Group, more and more employees were coming. When they heard this, they instantly looked over in curiosity. Gerald frowned. Kian was talking about Gerald. Benning hurriedly said, Kian, we are classmates. Don't be so mean. Kian looked at Benning and became more and more depressed. He sneered and said, am I wrong? Mr. Hansen has a good heart, so he let you work in our company, but you actually brought a person who had committed rape to the company. What do you think Universe Group is? When Jacob heard this, he was furious. Just as he was about to explain something, a slightly dignified voice sounded from behind them, what are you doing? Hearing this voice, everyone changed their expression slightly. Then, they bowed and said, Mr. Hansen. Gerald looked over, and sure enough, Leandro, who only had one arm, was striding over. Kian hurriedly bowed and said, Mr. Hansen, it's their first day working here, but they brought this person to the company. This person committed rape 9 years ago. He is a rapist. How could such a person come to our company? Shame on our company. He wanted to make Jacob and Benning look bad. If Leandro was angry, he might hire them. Beside him, Dia also chimed in, yes, Mr. Hansen. Bringing such a person to the company will indeed damage the company's image. Leandro glanced at them and asked, if I remember correctly, you are Kian and Dia, right? Kian was delighted. He did not expect Leandro to remember his name. He quickly nodded and said, yes, Mr. Hansen. Leandro glanced at them and said, Gerald is my friend. My friend came to Universe Group to check on me. Do I need your permission? What? Kian was completely stunned. He raised his head in shock and looked at Leandro. Leandro said calmly, I said my friend came to Universe Group to have some fun. Should I ask for your permission? Kian was dumbfounded. Gerald was Leandro's friend. This weekend, Kian was in a bad mood, but in his heart, he never thought that people like Gerald, Jacob, and Benning would have anything to do with Leandro. Who was Leandro? He was one of the most outstanding entrepreneurs in Sacramento, managing Universe Group, which was huge. Gerald had just returned to Sacramento. Jacob and Benning were at the bottom of society. In his opinion, they could come to work at Universe Group because they were lucky. But now, Leandro told him that Gerald was his friend. This was like a bolt from the blue, striking him until he was dead. How could you have such a friend? Kian couldn't help but say. Leandro looked at him with a faint smile and asked, so if I want to invite someone to our company, I will have to get your approval before I make friends with others. Hearing this, Kian broke out in a cold sweat. He hurriedly said, that's not what I meant. Apologize to Gerald. Leandro calmly said, either pack up your things and go through the resignation procedures. Kian's and Dia's faces suddenly changed, and they looked at Gerald at the same time. Meanwhile, Gerald was looking at him with a smile. Things changed so dramatically. They didn't seem to be prepared. They had to apologize to Gerald. They were somewhat unable to accept it in their hearts. But there was nothing they could do. They couldn't lose this job. Kian bowed and said, Gerald, I'm sorry. I was stupid and too arrogant. He apologized decisively. Gerald looked at him. This guy could do anything for the money. Gerald smiled and waved his hand. It's not a big deal. We are classmates. Go to work. Kian's mouth twitched. The more Gerald said, the more uncomfortable he felt, but there was nothing he could do. He looked at Leandro. Leandro waved his hand and said, go to work. As if Kian had been granted amnesty, he pulled Dia and rushed to the elevator. Leandro looked at the people around him and said in a dignified tone, what are you looking at? Go to work. The employees, who were watching, instantly went to work. After everyone left, Leandro looked at Gerald and said, are you just going to let it go? How is that possible? I am so pitiful. At my own place, I was bullied. Gerald sighed and said, Kian is very vain. The job of Universe Group was his biggest thing to show off. When they see Jacob become their boss later, you can fire them. After Gerald finished speaking, Jacob's eyes lit up immediately. Then Jacob chuckled. That's right. This guy was all high and mighty yesterday, thinking that he was very badass working here. I wonder if he can still be that smug when he gets fired. Besides him, Benning was at a loss about what to do. In fact, he felt that he was not qualified to work with Universe Group, and being able to work there still made him feel like a dream. Hearing that Gerald wanted to dismiss Kian, Benning was even more lost. He thought, even if Gerald and Leandro are friends, Gerald can't just dismiss someone like that. Right. Leandro nodded. Okay. Do as you say. Benning was dumbfounded. He did not expect Leandro to agree so readily. Benning then recalled how he obtained this job, which was exactly like how Kian was dismissed now, in which Gerald made a proposal casually and Leandro nodded in agreement. It seemed that the relationship between Gerald and Leandro was beyond measure. Benning, who was simple and honest, thought to himself. Then Leandro frowned and looked at Gerald. By the way, why are you here? Long story. My dad asked me to, Gerald said speechlessly. I told him that I was your assistant before. Due to that, he insisted on me coming to work with him together. Leandro smiled. While you're here, enjoy it then. There are quite a lot of beauties in our company. Maybe you will find someone you like. I'm not interested. Gerald yawned and said, now I will go back to grab some sleep. Take care of the two of them. Jacob was stunned. You don't want to witness how Kian gets dismissed. I feel good just thinking about it. Gerald waved his hand and said, not interested. If you are, you can film a clip and send it to the group of our class. Good suggestion. Jacob said, his eyes lighting up. Then I will go back now. Gerald chuckled before walking out. Since it was already 9 o'clock, there were fewer people at the door now. Gerald was standing at the door, wondering where he should go. If I take a taxi home now, Lilia, who is still at home, will for sure lecture me about playing hooky. I might as well call Kiera and see if I could go to her house and sleep on her sofa instead. Then he took out his phone, found Kiera's number, and dialed it. Hello, Gerald. Soon, Kiera picked up the phone. Hello, Gerald said, do you live alone? Kiera remained silent for a while before answering, I live alone. But Audrey and Hazel are here at my place now. What's the matter? I need more sleep, and it would be great if you could offer me your sofa. Gerald gave a little cough and said, my father made me go to work. If I go back now, they will find ads by Pub Future out. Well, I am at the bank now since it is Monday today. But I can send you the address. Audrey and Hazel, who are at home, can get the door for you, Kiera said. Gerald nodded. All right. Right. You seemed to have something on your mind yesterday. Since I was not sure if you wanted Audrey and Hazel to know about it, I didn't ask you yesterday. Kiera hesitated a bit before sighing and saying, the Zumthor family probably knows someone inside New Bank since they are aware that I am in charge of the diamond card now. And since I was the reason the bank stopped cooperation with the Zumthor family, Henley had reached out to me and even threatened me. Gerald frowned. He didn't expect this to happen before. After pondering for a moment, he said, don't worry. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. Kiera hesitated a bit and said, all right. I believe you. After hanging up the phone, Kiera sent the address over. Gerald then grabbed a cab and went to her place. In a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room in Sacramento, Eric was sitting on a stool in a room while looking with a wry smile at the short-haired girl sitting on the sofa. The girl's hair was a bit wet, and there was a plate of beef ramen in her hand. On the coffee table, there was some ravioli and other food as well. Eric said with a sad face, Master, if you keep eating like this, I think I'll have to eke out a living soon. He didn't understand how a girl could eat that much. There was nothing wrong with someone being a foodie. But in the short-haired girls, she was not just a foodie. She ate a lot, and yet managed to remain very case. Eric felt depressed. Fit. The short-haired girl looked at him and asked, I've taught you so many things over the past 3 years. It's only reasonable that you make money and treat me to some food. Plus, as I said before, when we find watchman number 0 and get back to night watch, I will have a lot of wealth. But we are still here, right? Eric said with a bitter smile. I'm almost out of money now. And yet, you stop me from taking any assassination missions. We're watchmen, remember. Although you are on the killer list now, you have to keep in mind that you are a watchman who is supposed to kill people who deserve to be killed, understand? Don't disgrace yourself just for some money, the short-haired girl said in a serious tone. Then she continued, have you found any news about Watchman No? Where am I supposed to find him? Eric said speechlessly. I have been waiting outside that internet cafe all night. But I didn't see him at all. Then, he gave a dry cough and said, since he is alive, maybe he has already returned to night watch. If we go back as well, we may be able to find him there. Let's go back. Then, we won't have to worry about money. I am tired of struggling like this. The short-haired girl looked up at him and then shook her head. It's not the time yet. If we go back, we are watchmen. That means we won't be able to kill people at will. That way, who is gonna take watchman number 7's revenge? After that, she raised her head and continued, keep guarding the internet cafe tonight. And I will continue to track down the whereabouts of those people. Eric said with a sad face. I still have to work. Do you want to tire me to death? But the short-haired girl ignored him. Instead, she took out the photo with Gerald and her in it and murmured, Gerald, I haven't seen you for 3 years. I miss you. Inside Universe Group, Jacob and Benning had finished going through the entry procedures with the help of Leandro. Now they, 3 of them were walking toward the marketing department. In the conference room of the marketing department, all the senior staff of the department was sitting there. Kian looked slightly pale. He was still shocked at what had happened in the hall just now. He found Gerald being Leandro's friend unbelievable. It doesn't seem to be a routine meeting. What is the general manager waiting for? I don't know. Maybe we are waiting for some new colleagues. Kian's colleagues were discussing, but Kian failed to listen to them at all. Suddenly, the sound of steps was heard. Then, Leandro walked in with Benning and Jacob. Noticing that, the general manager of the marketing department hurried to stand up. Mr. Hansen, all the senior staff of the marketing department are here now. Leandro nodded and then walked over with Jacob and Benning. Then he propped one hand against the table and looked at Kian, who was not far away. Kian looked in the direction of the 3 as well. And at the sight of Benning and Jacob, Kian became vicious. I will make 2 announcements, Leandro said. We'll have 2 new senior managers in the marketing department. Allow me to introduce them a bit. This is Benning Cobb, the supervisor of the marketing department. Then he paused before looking at Jacob. This is the new director of the marketing department, Jacob Eden. Marketing director. He's so young, and yet he is only inferior to the general manager. Who is this guy anyway? Amid the discussion, no one noticed that Kian, his pupils contracting slightly, was looking at Jacob in shock. He thought that Jacob would start as a grassroots employee here. However, much to his surprise, Jacob was the director of the marketing department. Just a few days ago, Kian still didn't think much of Jacob, thinking that people like Jacob only belonged to the underclass. Due to that, Kian found Jacob's interview with Universe Group unbelievable and thus even tried to make things difficult for Jacob during the interview. But now, it turned out that Jacob was his senior, one that was in a rank 2 levels higher than Kian. Impossible. This is insane. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he muttered to himself. At that moment, Leandro spoke again, "Be quiet. I have another announcement to make." As he spoke, he looked at Jacob. "Jacob, please make the announcement." Jacob was stunned for a moment. But soon, he looked happy and turned to Kian. Kian felt uneasy. Then, he saw Jacob walk down from the front toward him. On his way, Jacob smiled in a way that looked somewhat mocking. Then, he said calmly, "Kian, you and Dia have been dismissed." "Kian, you and Dia have been dismissed." Jacob had a mocking smile on his face as he stared at Kian and spoke indifferently. Jacob felt awesome after making the announcement. From the first day he was here in Universe Group, to the alumni reunion, Jacob found things always difficult for him. But right now, after making the announcement, Jacob felt that things had changed greatly, and it was all because Gerald was back in Sacramento. Kian, the insufferably arrogant class president, had been dismissed by him. Jacob knew that now he was truly a member of the upper class in Sacramento. He found that he had broadened his horizons greatly in this instant. And as he made the announcement, he no longer felt any grudges within him now. His girlfriend, for one, seemed to have become less significant. Although Gerald gave him $800,000 to make Jacob look good in front of his girlfriend. But deep down, Jacob found the whole thing surreal and thus refused to make any change. But now, he had a completely different view. For a woman like that, as well as her family, they were simply not worthy at all. Meanwhile, Kian, unlike Jacob, who felt good and enlightened, was going through something completely different. Kian, his eyes wide open, had collapsed on the chair, with his whole body limp. His mind was buzzing and going blank, and his eyes dulled. Then he looked at Jacob in shock and then at Benning. 2 days ago, Kian was still all high and mighty, thinking that he was vastly superior to the two. But now, Benning and Jacob were both his seniors, with Benning's rank 1 level higher than his and Jacob's 2 levels higher. Moreover, he and Dia had been dismissed, a change that radical made plans suffer from a meltdown. Not everyone could get into a big company like Universe Group. It was true that Kian was competent to some extent, judging from the fact that he was young, and yet he was already a higher up in Universe Group. But now that he had to leave, he needed to start all over again. Then Leandro glanced at him and said calmly, "That's it. Everyone can leave now. As for Kian, you and your girlfriend need to pack your things up and go through the departure procedures." Meanwhile, Gerald, who actually didn't care how Kian was now and only proposed the dismissal because it was convenient, was on his way to Kiera's place. Kiera did not live with her parents. In fact, her family was quite well off, with her parents both being locals of Sacramento and currently teachers, having their own house. Kiera herself was very hardworking as well. After graduation, she got a job at New Bank. Despite New Bank having a high threshold, Kiera managed to be promoted to the position of the manager of the Los Angeles branch over just a few years, with an annual salary of around $320,000. That alone suggested that she was very competent. Apart from that, she had bought houses both in Los Angeles and Sacramento. She thought that she might need to stay in Los Angeles for a long time. But because of Gerald, she got to move back to Ads by Pub Future, Sacramento. Soon, Gerald arrived at Kiera's place. After buying some breakfast, he walked towards Kiera's place. Since Kiera told Audrey that Gerald was coming, Audrey then texted Gerald, asking him to buy some breakfast while he was on his way. After Gerald had arrived, he knocked on the door. Audrey opened the door instantly. Poking her head out, Audrey smiled at Gerald, took the breakfast, and said, "Thank you." But Gerald didn't say anything. Instead, he changed his shoes and walked directly into the room. In the living room, Hazel was doing her morning exercises with a serious face. Gerald's eyes lit up slightly when he saw that. Unlike Audrey, who was fully clothed, Hazel was wearing a tight-fitting crop top and a pair of shorts, her good figure manifesting itself. Hazel tended to enjoy wearing revealing clothes a lot. When Gerald first saw her, she was wearing those kinds of clothes. That being said, her outfit today still made Gerald drool over her. At the sight of Gerald, Hazel did not change her clothes. Instead, she continued her exercises. Obviously, the exercises that Hazel was doing were different from ordinary fighting, which required a muscular body from the fighter, be it male or female. But Hazel's figure was not beefy at all. Noticing that Gerald fixed a gaze at Hazel, Audrey walked to Gerald's side and asked, "Do you like it?" Gerald coughed dryly as he said hurriedly, "Hazel, who did you learn the technique from?" Hazel stopped and said as she exhaled, "My dad. He owns a gym in Los Angeles." Gerald, surprised, sized Hazel up. In fact, Gerald had thought about making Hazel a watchman before. Unlike Trevor and Jacob, Hazel knew well how to fight and was much younger. Gerald nodded and started to instruct her in her techniques a few times casually. Thanks to Gerald's instruction, Hazel found that her punches had become way more powerful and easier. She looked at Gerald in shock. She knew that Gerald was a badass since she had seen Gerald fight with her own eyes before. With dozens of people waving weapons at them, Gerald saved her from them with ease. That being said, Gerald's casual but beneficial instruction still surprised her a lot. Then Gerald dropped into the sofa and said, "Well, I am here to grab some sleep. Don't wake me up. I tend to wake up grumpy. Especially when I don't get enough sleep. By then, you might have to suffer the consequences. Nobody knows what I might do to you then." "Okay." Audrey didn't make any comments on that. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Soon, Gerald fell asleep. After an unknown while, he felt an itch on his nose. Due to that, he opened his eyes. Then he saw a very delicate face in front of him. It was Audrey. Audrey was looking down at him while shaking her head smilingly and tickling Gerald on the nose with the tip of her long hair. Gerald chuckled as he jerked out his hand so as to grab Audrey's arm before pulling her over. At the same time, he jumped up from the sofa and turned over while pressing Audrey under him. Audrey was shocked, with her eyes wide open. Then she blushed furiously. What are you doing?" Audrey asked with a stutter. Looking at Audrey's reddening face and her lips, which were slightly pursed, while sensing Audrey's skin, Gerald chuckled, "I told you that I might wake up grumpy. What else could I do?" As he spoke, he pressed down his face slowly. Audrey's face became even redder, but, to Gerald's surprise, she did not resist all the while. At that moment, a voice sounded. Gerald turned to look in the direction of the voice and found that it was Hazel, who was coming out of the shower not far away. At the sight of the two on the sofa, Hazel was shocked. And noticing that Gerald and Audrey were both darting a look at her, Hazel said hurriedly, "Go on." "I did not see anything." Only then did Audrey come back to her senses. Then she pushed Gerald away hurriedly and said, "Pervert." Gerald sat up with a smile. He was just teasing Audrey. Of course, if Hazel had not spoken just now, he might really have kissed her. After all, it was men's nature to make advances to girls whenever they could. "I told you that I woke up grumpy. I'm not the one to blame," Gerald said. Audrey glared and said, "It's already 11 o'clock in the morning, and yet you are still sleeping. Are you a pig?" As she spoke, she threw a pillow in her hand at Gerald. Then she looked at Hazel and said, "Hazel, you didn't see anything just now." All right. I didn't see anything." Hazel looked at her with a smile. Audrey nodded in satisfaction. Then she looked at Gerald again. "Now get up and hang out with me." Gerald rubbed his nose and did not turn her down. That was because he was actually a little bored. Be it his personal matters, or the search for watchman number 2, he had to do it at night. As a result, he hung out with Audrey and Hazel for a whole afternoon before taking a car and rushing home at night. When he was home, he found Lelia, Jolie, and Drake on the sofa. They were here again. Lelia was talking to Mason. Mason, things have been going very well in your family. As a member of the Kenneth family, you took charge of a big company at the beginning. Then thanks to Gerald, you became the vice president of Universe Group with an annual salary of around $200,000. Despite being related to Yasmin, I haven't really asked you for anything over these years, right? Lelia said. The only thing I asked you for was a position for Jolie in Universe Group, which you haven't agreed with. Therefore, this time, you have to help me no matter what. Mason, embarrassed, smiled bitterly. It's not that I don't want to help you. The thing is that I don't get a say in these kinds of things. I am not as powerful as you think I am. HMPH, Lelia snorted. I don't believe you. Why would Universe Group spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on you then? Moreover, you are the only one that was likely to get Gerald into Universe Group. I can't believe you put on the show 2 days ago, telling me that you had nothing to do with Gerald's position in the group. If it weren't for you, why would the president of Universe Group want Gerald as his assistant? I mean, Gerald has been in prison for 9 years and doesn't have any educational background. Let's just say you despise us and don't feel like helping poor relatives like us, right? Hearing that, Gerald frowned and walked into the room. He pulled a chair and sat down. When Jolie saw Gerald, she snorted. Drake was sitting next to her and remained calm. Gerald could tell that Drake was arrogant. Lelia's words were a bit harsh. Mason hurriedly said, "You can't say that. I'm not in charge of anything in Universe Group. I just occasionally attend some events. I don't even have much contact with their staff, so it's not the case that I don't want to help you." Lelia sneered and said, "It's just an excuse. Still, Mason, you can even get Gerald into Universe Group and make him an assistant to Leandro. To put it bluntly, you just don't want to help us. Through the matter about Yasmin and Gerald, is there your relative caring about you? Mason, they all rolled their eyes at the sight of you. What about us? Lelia asked. It's indeed a step down for Yasmin to marry you. But after this matter, we've taken good care of you. We didn't avoid you during the family gathering, but you refused when Jolie graduated last year and wanted to enter Universe Group. Gerald sat on the side and frowned slightly. Mason sighed and said, "Lelia, you can't say that. When your house was renovated and Jolie's father was sick, we lent money to you, and we never urged you to repay it. We all keep your kindness in our mind." Lelia did not appreciate it. She snorted and said, "Anyway, you have to help us this time. You must facilitate the cooperation between Drake and Universe Group." Mason frowned and looked at Drake. Lelia had obviously regarded Drake as her son-in-law. Drake was young and had his own company. He was clearly very rich. However, Gerald did not have a good impression of Drake and felt that he was a little sinister. For example, the last time he came home, Drake wanted to cooperate with Universe Group and thus came to beg Mason, but in terms of Drake's words, it seemed that Gerald's family took advantage of Drake. Giving Gerald a job offer was nothing compared to the investment Drake got from Universe Group. This time, Drake asked Lelia and Jolie to put pressure on Gerald's father. It was fine to do business in this way. After all, it was normal to use every means in business, but Gerald was quite disgusted that Drake played this trick to deal with his family. Even now, smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. When Lelia was so aggressive, Drake did not say anything. Gerald did not even see a gift. Drake was here to ask for help. Unbelievable. Mason looked at Drake and said, Today, I introduced him to the manager of our company's investment department, who wasn't optimistic about Drake's project, so they are not willing to invest. Drake shook his head and said, Mason, I've spent several years developing this game. The manager of your company's investment department has no taste. Mason frowned and said, Steve Blake, the manager of our investment department, is the best investor nationwide and even around the world. Meanwhile, Lilia said, Mason, it's fine if you don't want to help. Why do you need to find excuses? Just say you don't want to. And we won't waste time here. I know that there is a gap between our two families. You're rich, and we're poor. That's why we aren't qualified to associate with you. Mason looked helpless. In fact, Mason had supported Lilia's family financially a lot in the past 2 years. Yasmin was also embarrassed. She looked at Gerald, then glanced at Lilia, and said, Lilia, it's not that Mason doesn't want to help you. He's indeed not powerful in the company. Drake pondered and said, Mason, I won't ask to work with Universe Group anymore. Why don't you introduce me to the investors of other companies, such as Goldson Group? I saw you having dinner with the chairman of Goldson Group last time. Can you let me meet her and I'll talk to her about the specifics? Lilia nodded and said, yes, Drake is young and promising. He said that this project will produce great profits in the future. He also talked to Goldson Group, but its chairman was unwilling to see him. When Gerald heard the name of the chairman of Goldson Group, he was slightly surprised. Gerald wondered, isn't Goldson Group belong to Jessica? Mason looked a little embarrassed and said, I am not particularly familiar with Ms. Lang. Last time I just had dinner with her. But I don't even have her contact. You. Hearing this, Lilia was instantly pissed off. She looked at Mason and said, it's fine if don't want to help, but why do you keep finding excuses? You just don't want us to be good, right? After Gerald got out of jail, you got him into Universe Group. Now, Jolie finally found a rich boyfriend, and Gerald didn't have a girlfriend. Thus, you are unhappy and don't want Drake to make a lot of money. If you don't want to help, whatever. Mason and Yasmin looked more helpless. Gerald also frowned. He was a little unhappy. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. However, given they were relatives, Gerald felt that it was okay to help Jolie and her family. He rubbed his nose and said, I have connections with Jessica, chairman of Goldson Group. If you want to know her, I can help you. However, I have to remind you that it still depends on your project. If her company takes a fancy to it, you may have a chance to get an investment. As soon as Gerald finished speaking, everyone looked at him. Lilia frowned and said, stop acting. If not for your father, would you be able to work in Universe Group? You have been in prison for 9 years. How could you know an entrepreneur like Leandro the moment you got out? If you said you know Jessica, I could even say that I know William Griffin and Adrian Braun. Gerald was speechless. William and Adrian were really famous in Sacramento. Universe Group could compete with the companies of these large families in Sacramento, but Leandro wasn't on par with these people. It was because everyone knew that Leandro had very few shares in Universe Group. However, William and Adrian were different, who were really in charge of the family business. Then Lilia looked at Mason and said, Mason, just tell me if you'll lend a hand or not. If you help, when Jolie and Drake get married, our family will be grateful to you lifetime. If not, let us not contact each other in the future. Lilia obviously threatened Mason with affection. Gerald, who originally wanted to help them, frowned and wanted to ignore them. Mason and Yasmin's faces changed slightly. Because they grew apart from the Kenneth family, and their relatives didn't contact them anymore, Mason and Yasmin especially cherished the people around them. Mason gritted his teeth. Yasmin quickly looked at Gerald and said, Gerald, if you really know Ems Lang, just help them and let Drake meet her. Gerald sighed and picked up the phone. Lilia frowned. Do you need to put on an act like this? How could Gerald know such a big shot? Well, Yasmin, Mason, I finally know who you are. Meanwhile, Gerald made the call. He walked to a corner, and Jessica said, Hello. Gerald, what's the matter? Well, my cousin's boyfriend owns a game company. He has a project in need of investment, and he wants to see you. However, his company is small and seems to have been rejected by your company. Do you have time to talk to him? Gerald said, Surely, it depends on your evaluation of his project whether you invest or not. Jessica nodded. No problem. What is the name of his company? I don't know, but the person who wants to meet you is called Drake, Gerald said. Okay, I will set it up, Jessica said. Hanging up the phone, Gerald returned to the living room and said to Yasmin, I called Ems Lang. I called Ems Lang. She said that she would fix it, Gerald said, touching his nose. Lilia suddenly quieted down, including Jolie. They all looked at Gerald in shock. Lilia's voice was heavy with sarcasm. Gerald, do you think it's funny? You are going to tell us later that you don't have time. Right. Beep, beep, beep. At this time, Drake's phone suddenly rang. Drake quickly picked up his phone and looked at it. He picked up the call and said, Hello, this is Goldson Group. Just now, Ems Lang saw the information you handed over. He wants to meet you at the company at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Do you have time? A pleasant girl's voice sounded from the phone. Yes, Drake hurriedly said. After hanging up the phone, Drake looked at Gerald, then looked at Lilia and said, Lilia, Goldson Group said that they have seen the information I handed over. They are willing to meet me tomorrow morning. Yasmin and Mason looked happy. Yasmin hurriedly smiled and said, Look, Gerald really knows Ems Lang. We are all family. If we can help you, we will definitely do that. You have to trust us. Gerald was speechless. If he were not considering his parents' feelings, he would not help at all. Drake smiled at first, then stood up and said, Mason, you seem to be mistaken. Just now, Goldson Group said that Ems Lang looked at my information and asked me to meet her. It seems that it has nothing to do with Gerald. As Lilia said, Gerald has been in prison for 9 years. With your help, he entered Goldson Group. I don't believe that he has such connections. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Coincidentally, Gerald pretended to make a phone call and Ems Lang saw my information. Lilia hurriedly nodded. That's right. Ems Lang was willing to meet after seeing Drake's information. It proves that they are optimistic about Drake's project. Stop pretending here. Yes. Did you just say we are family? It's fine if you are not willing to help, but you are lying to us, Lilia said. I'm going to introduce a blind date to Gerald. Forget it. When Drake gets the investment of Goldson Group and succeeds, he will marry Jolie. When the time comes, you will come and beg us to help you. Gerald narrowed his eyes and looked at Drake. A trace of anger flashed in his eyes. Yasmin and Mason's expressions changed slightly. Mason sighed and said, Forget it. I don't want to explain it. Humph. Lilia got up, pulled Jolie, and said, Jolie, Drake, let's go. Ads by Pub Future. With that, the three of them turned and left the room. Jolie didn't even say a word, but she looked at Gerald with a strange expression. After they left, Yasmin looked at Gerald suspiciously and asked, Gerald, were you pretending to call just now or? Gerald spread his hands and said, Dad, Mom, don't you know? I went to work at Universe Group by myself. Lilia and the others thought that we were just acting. What can I do? I did get to know Ems Lang by chance. Our relationship is not bad. Just now, called her, and she agreed. Gerald frowned and said, there is something wrong with Drake. We can't let Jolie continue to be with him. He took out his phone and said, I will call Jessica and ask her to cancel the meeting with Drake. Yasmin quickly said, Gerald, forget it. If Lilia knows about it, she will probably completely fall out with us. Gerald frowned. He knew that his parents treasured their family too much. Gerald did not want to go against his parents, so he sighed slightly and put away his phone. Gerald replied, all right. Yasmin said, by the way, the day after tomorrow is your grandmother's 80th birthday. Ever since you had an accident, your grandmother has been talking about you. After you came back, you didn't have the chance to go and see her. We can go together the day after tomorrow. Mason nodded and answered, I will go to Mr. Hanson tomorrow to ask for a day off. Then I will give you some money and buy some gifts for your grandmother. Gerald thought of his grandmother and smiled. His grandmother had been very good to him since he was young. He nodded and said, okay, but I have money. You don't have to give it to me. Mason nodded and said, all right, go to your room. I'll watch TV and go to sleep. Gerald nodded and returned to his room. He calmed himself down and began to cultivate cross-legged. In a mountain village near Sacramento, this place was a temporary base for night watch in Sacramento. There were not many people in this place, probably only a few hundred people, forming a small village. Although it was small, it was built very exquisitely. Because they were temporarily carrying out a mission yesterday, they stayed in Sacramento for one night and just returned to the village now. Irene and the others sat in the car and looked around. There were many people carrying sabers walking back and forth. As they moved forward, Irene and the other two in the car were completely stunned. Inside, there were people fighting. When they fought, the saber light flashed, as if it was something that happened in a movie. They also personally saw one of them shatter a stone with a single punch. Although they had been informed beforehand, when they actually saw it, their hearts were still filled with horror. They could not imagine that there was such a mysterious organization in this world. What shocked Irene was that her ex-husband was once one of the most powerful people in this group. However, she chose to divorce him because she despised him for being poor. Now it seemed that she had done something really stupid. At this time, several people came over. When Dennis got out of the car, someone asked, Captain, where is Watchman Noah? He hasn't returned to night watch yet. Even if he is back, he is not in our squad. Why are you so anxious? Dennis scolded. We haven't seen each other for 3 years. And many new members want to see Watchman Noah. A young man with cropped hair chuckled. I'm not bragging. Back then, Watchman number 0 and I entered night watch together. He always treated me with respect. The small squad of Dennis belonged to the number 1176 team of night watch. Gerald was once a member of the squad. The man who spoke was called Hamza Broom. He joined the squad with Gerald at the time. You're bragging. Every time you are on a mission, you are always hiding at the back. Yes, you are good at bragging. Hey, Captain, why did you bring back 2 girls? At this time, a suspicious voice sounded. Captain, why didn't you bring me to brothels? Go to hell, Dennis scolded. Don't talk nonsense. This is Gerald's ex-wife and ex-mother-in-law. Damn, drive. Manning was referring to this mother and daughter, right? They said before that Gerald was poor and then kicked him out. Hamza said exaggeratedly. There are people who call Gerald poor. I've never met a richer man than Gerald. In an instant, everyone looked into the car window. From the car window, Irene and the other two had strange expressions. They could see endless ridicule in these people's eyes. It was as if saying that Gerald was very poor was a big joke. All right, stop joking around. Arrange 2 female members to talk to them. The others, prepare to go to Sacramento and carry out a mission. Dennis waved his hand. Mission. Hamza said excitedly. What mission? Dennis's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he said in a serious tone, we found traces of Watchman No. 2. Capture her and bring her back. At 12 at night, Gerald opened his eyes. After cultivating for a few hours, he felt refreshed. He looked out of the window. It was already dark outside. Gerald let out a breath and walked out of the room. Gerald had not found Stephen's address yet, so he had no way to ask Stephen about the truth. Yesterday, after Kerry told Gerald that it was Stephen who ordered him to do so, Gerald tried to figure it out. Stephen had a solid reason. At that time, Stephen and Mason were competing. In order to make Mason lose his competitive advantage, Stephen had the motivation to frame Mason's son, Gerald. But Gerald clearly remembered that at the annual meeting of the Kenneth family, he was sitting with his peers of the Kenneth family. Gerald drank beer and he opened every bottle of them himself. It meant that it must be someone who sat with him and drugged him without being noticed. At that time, because Gerald had excellent performance and was favored by the family, the people who sat with him were mostly the direct line of descent from the Kenneth family. Therefore, when Leandro told Gerald that the Kenneth family was also involved, Gerald thought that it should be related to the direct line of descent from the Kenneth family. And Stephen, like Mason, was an offshoot. Of course, Gerald felt that there would be no problem if he followed this clue and dug out the truth to prove his innocence. After organizing everything, Gerald decided to ask Leandro to check Stephen's address tomorrow first, and then he would go to visit Stephen at night. Thinking of this, Gerald slightly frowned. He lay down on the bed and continued to sleep. Nothing happened tonight. The next day, Mason woke him up early in the morning and drove him to Universe Group. Gerald felt that it was necessary to move out. Otherwise, he would not be able to get enough sleep and it would be difficult if he wanted to make a move. Gerald had just returned to Sacramento. He had not seen his parents for 9 years. He should spend more time with them. When they arrived at the company, Gerald made up an excuse and slipped away. He ran to Kira's place to take a nap. At 10 o'clock in the morning, in Goldson Group, Jessica wore a white suit and walked into a conference room with a few people, who were holding folders in their arms, behind her. Drake and Jolie were sitting in the conference room. When Drake saw Jessica walk in, he hurriedly stood up. Ads by Pub Future. There was no longer arrogance on his face as he had when he faced Gerald and the others. Instead, he reached out in a fawning manner and bowed, saying, "Ems. Lang. Nice to meet you." Jessica smiled and looked at Jolie as she said, "You are Gerald's cousin." When Jolie and Drake heard this, they were stunned for a moment. Seeing their expressions, Jessica instantly understood. She said, "It seems that Gerald is really low-key. He introduced you to me without telling you, right? You have a good cousin." She was talking to Jolie when she said the last sentence. Jolie and Drake could not help but swallow their saliva. They thought, Jessica knows Gerald. This famous beautiful CEO in Sacramento knows Gerald. It was because of Gerald's call that Drake could be able to meet Jessica. Gerald was not acting yesterday. Drake was stunned. He swallowed his saliva. When he left yesterday, he said Gerald was acting, but Gerald actually did not call Jessica to cancel this meeting. Drake looked down on Gerald from the bottom of his heart. Drake worked hard and made himself worth over $1 million at such a young age. As for Gerald, he had been in prison as a rapist for 9 years and had just been released from prison. Drake always felt superior when he faced Gerald. But now, when Drake learned that Gerald actually knew Jessica, a big shot in Sacramento, he was surprised and could not figure it out. Jolie was slightly stunned. After a while, her expression became a little subtle. She could not help but say, "Ems. Lang. How did you know Gerald?" Jessica smiled and said, "It was a coincidence. He had done me a favor and then we got to know each other." She sat down and said, "Take a seat. Introduce us to your project and your plan." "This is our assessment team." Gerald introduced. You and your plan to me, but our company will not invest in a project randomly. It depends on your project's prospects. Drake and Jolie sat down, but Jolie was not in the mood to introduce the plan. She was absent-minded, and no one knew what she was thinking. Drake sat down and said confidently, "We brought a game project that I have planned for a long time. I believe that it will definitely become a more popular game than League of Legends and Honor of Kings." Drake made a slideshow and started a speech. Jessica carefully listened to Drake, her brows tightly furrowed. The assessment team was constantly exchanging opinions with each other. Half an hour later, Drake's speech was over, and he looked at Jessica. Jessica sat still. There were no traces of time on her face, but instead, she had a sort of charm that only time could bring to her. Drake could not help but swallow. Jessica frowned and said, "Please wait a moment. We need to discuss it before making the decision." After another 10 minutes, Jessica raised her eyes and said, "Sorry, Mr. Grandison. We can't invest in your game project." Drake was stunned for a moment. His face changed slightly as he said, "But the investment fund is negotiable. This is a very promising project. I promise." "Sorry." Jessica shook her head and then said, "This is the result of our evaluation. There is nothing I can do. The company is not operated by me alone." Drake's face darkened. Then he asked, "Ms. Lang, did Gerald say something to you yesterday? Did he ask you not to invest in my plan?" Jessica frowned and said, "What are you talking about? Business is business. I won't joke about my company. We won't reject a business plan just because of a few words from Gerald. It's just that we think that your project has no prospects. Of course, this is just our opinion. You can go to other companies to attract investment funds." She smiled and said, "I'll let you see yourself out." After that, Jessica left the conference room. Drake's face darkened when he saw Jessica leave. He punched at the table and said, "Jolie, it must be Gerald." He called Ms. Lang and told her not to invest in our plan. He let Ms. Lang meet us and judge our plan. He was trying to humiliate me. Jolie was stunned and said, "How could that be? Maybe Ms. Lang just doesn't like our project. It must be him. My project is so good. Ms. Lang has no reason to refuse me." Drake said with a gloomy face. "This is not over." Gerald did not know about all of this. He slept in Kira's place and didn't wake up until it was almost 12 o'clock at noon. When he got up, he saw Audrey sitting opposite him and looked at him angrily. "Why are you glaring at me?" Gerald rubbed his eyes and asked. "Humph, you pervert. You tried to kiss me yesterday." Audrey glared at Gerald and said, "I will forgive you if you have lunch with me." Gerald was speechless. "You can just tell me that you want me to treat you to a meal." Revealing two dimples, Audrey smiled. "I didn't ask you to treat me today. My college roommate invited me to a meal, but there is a very annoying man who will also be coming. You have to pretend to be my boyfriend." Gerald was lost for words. "Again, why don't you let me be your real boyfriend? But it will not be free, of course." Audrey was stunned for a moment and blushed. She made a face at Gerald and said, "You wish. You wish." Audrey smiled and said, "I will pay the fee, $320. "Sure." Gerald grinned. Then Gerald looked around and asked, "Where is Hazel?" "She went out to meet her friend." Audrey said, "You men are all lecherous. You saw Hazel is sexy and kept staring at her yesterday. Everyone has a love of beauty." Gerald coughed and went to the bathroom to wash his face. Then, he and Audrey left Kieran's home. They took a taxi to a hotel for dinner. When they arrived at the entrance of the hotel, Audrey and Gerald got out of the taxi. At this time, there were two women and one man standing at the entrance. When they saw Audrey, the two women hurriedly came over. They hugged Audrey. One of them said, "Audrey, long time no see. I missed you so much." "Me too," Audrey said with a smile. It could be seen that Audrey had a good relationship with the two girls, and a heartfelt smile appeared on her face. Is this your boyfriend? At this time, a girl looked at Gerald with a smile. When she saw Gerald's clothes, she inadvertently frowned. Gerald clearly caught the change in her mood, but he did not care. Beside her, another tall girl smiled and said, "You are really lucky. Audrey is the most beautiful girl at California State University." At that time, countless young men chased after her. "You are really lucky." Audrey snorted at Gerald and said, "Did you hear that? This is your good fortune." After saying that, she smiled and said, "Let me introduce him to everyone. This is my boyfriend, Gerald. These two girls are my roommates." Audrey pointed at the taller girl and said, "This is Tara. And this is Sophia." Sophia was a slightly plump girl. The two girls were obviously not rich people. They were just ordinary office workers. They only had the opportunity to treat Audrey to a meal at noon. Audrey looked at the only young and thin man with glasses and said, "This is our colleague, Brian." Gerald reached out his hand and said, "Nice to meet you." Since Gerald was here to be Audrey's boyfriend, he had to be polite. However, Brian did not reach out. He just touched his glasses and said in front of Gerald, "Audrey, you don't seem to have a good eye for finding a boyfriend. You actually found such an ordinary person. He looks to be 27 or 28 years. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Old, but he doesn't even have a car. He even took a taxi to bring you here." As he spoke, Brian looked at Gerald with a smile and said, "What do you do? Do you have a monthly salary of over $1,600? Gerald felt funny since he was pretending to be Audrey's boyfriend. He shrugged indifferently and said, "I do not have a job. I am unemployed." The mockery on Brian's face deepened. He shook his head and said in front of Gerald, "Audrey, you actually found such a person. You should break up with him and be with me. Now that I have worked at the Kenneth Group, I have accumulated some resources. In 2 years, I will come out to work alone. In the future." Audrey glanced at him and directly held Gerald's hand. "It has nothing to do with you. So what if Gerald is a beggar? As long as I like him. And I am sorry, I am not short of money, I am very rich." Brian was stunned. Yes, Audrey's father is the richest man in Los Angeles. He won't care whether his future son-in-law is rich or not. Moreover, Audrey's words made Brian embarrassed. Brian looked at Gerald and found that Gerald had an innocent expression. Gerald shrugged at Brian as if saying, "She just likes me. I can't help it." Brian was so angry. Sophia quickly said, "Okay, Brian, you said that you wouldn't pick a fight and we are willing to let you. Come, stop talking. I have already booked a table, let's go upstairs and eat." Brian still looked angry. He stared at Gerald, and then the group walked into the hotel. The lobby on the 3rd floor of the hotel was a perfect place. Of course, it was not the kind that was particularly expensive. However, it was not cheap either. The per capita consumption was at least $90. It was a place where the gold-collar workers usually came. After ordering, they began to chat. Brian took the initiative to say, "Although the salary is good in the Kenneth Group, it is really tiring. I have to work for more than 10 hours a day." Sophia pursed her lips and said, "You are fine. Anyway, I am now in a company that is not big. I work 6 days a week, and I can only get more than $1,600 a month." They all graduated from California State University. As one of the best universities in America, the salary of the graduates would not be too low. They had only graduated for 1 or 2 years, and their salary was already higher than many people who had worked for several years. "I still envy Audrey. Her family is so rich." Tara looked at Audrey with a grin. Audrey did not say anything and just smiled. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Audrey was smart. If she talked about her family, the others would feel uncomfortable. Brian said again, but it's good. I get the promotion quickly these 2 years. The Kenneth Group is about to take the test. If it goes well, I can become one of their managers in the next few days. It's difficult to be in the management in such a family business, Sophia said. Well, but it's just a transition for me anyway. After accumulating the social resources, I will definitely start a business, Brian glanced at Gerald and said proudly, when I become one of the management, my annual salary and dividends have to be millions of dollars. I have bought a car and a house now. I'm just accumulating some money and social resources and I will start a business later. Sophia and Tara both showed envy on their faces. The look in their eyes made Brian very happy. He looked at Gerald next to him as if he was showing off to Gerald. In the end, Brian found that Gerald looked completely uninterested and was looking around. Country bumpkin, Brian cursed in his heart. At this time, the waiter served the dishes. They all ordered steak. Brian looked at Gerald with a faint smile and asked, "Do you know how to use knives and forks?" Gerald raised his eyes and glanced at Brian. Audrey glanced at Brian coldly and said, "Don't go too free." Brian was very angry. Then he thought of something and smiled coldly. He looked at Gerald and asked, "Gerald, today's meal was invited by their girls. As men, we have to pay something. Let's treat them to a bottle of red wine, okay?" Brian asked. As he said that, Brian said lightly, "The red wine here is quite good, shall we have a bottle? We each have half, how about one bottle?" In his opinion, Gerald would probably not be able to afford a bottle of red wine. Brian wanted to embarrass Gerald. Gerald narrowed his eyes. Sophia hurriedly said, "I have to go to work in the afternoon, so I won't drink." "It's okay to drink some red wine." Brian grinned and looked at Gerald. He asked, "How is it? We each pay half. You can't even afford this little money, can you?" Gerald looked at Audrey, then looked at Brian. The mockery on Brian's face deepened. Sophia and Tara were a little embarrassed, of course. They were also looking forward to it. Their income could not support them to drink some more expensive red wine. "Since you said so, I naturally can't refuse you," Gerald said with a smile. Brian looked happy then. He looked up and said, "Excuse me." Soon, a waiter came over and asked, "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" Brian was about to speak when Gerald said, "Open a bottle of the most expensive red wine here." Huh. Brian's pupils suddenly shrank when he heard this. His heart also beat violently. The red wine in this hotel restaurant was about $80,000. "Give me a bottle of the most expensive red wine here," Gerald said to the waiter with a smile. The waiter froze for a moment and then said, "Sir, the most expensive red wine here is sold for $80,000. Beside her, Audrey froze first and then gave a smile. She did not like Brian in the first place. Brian had been pestering her during his university days. She was very disgusted, but because he had been chasing Audrey, he had often bought dinner for Audrey's roommates. Therefore, he was close with Audrey's roommates. This time, Sophia and Tara told him the news of Audrey, and then he ran over. Although Audrey did not know Gerald's background, just because she knew Gerald had a diamond card from New Bank, she knew this bottle of red wine was nothing to Gerald. However, Brian was different. He was not in the management of the Kenneth family yet, so he couldn't earn $160,000 a year. Judging from how Brian had shown off just now, if his salary were very high now, he would definitely say it out loud. He did not say it, so it proved his salary was actually quite ordinary. He could afford a bottle of wine that was worth around $3,000, but this $80,000 wine would probably cost his annual salary. She smiled and said to the waiter, "Go open it." The waiter nodded and left the dining table. Sophia and Tara both had astonished expressions on their faces, and they couldn't utter a sound. They also thought Gerald must have no money. They also knew Brian asked Gerald to pay the bill. Together just to humiliate Gerald. They were fully astonished when Gerald spoke. Brian's face was red. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something. But Gerald looked at him with a smile and said, casually, it's just $80,000. We will only need to pay $40,000 each. You can afford it, can't you? Gerald repeated what Brian had said. Hearing that, Brian felt his throat tremble. He really wanted to refuse, but if he refused, he would feel embarrassed. Brian thought Gerald and Audrey had taken a taxi here, and the way Gerald was dressed indicated. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. He was not rich. Brian gritted his teeth, looked at Gerald, and said, you don't look like a rich person at all. What? You have been relying on Audrey. You pretend to be rich with Audrey's money. He knew Audrey's family was rich. In fact, Brian chased Audrey not only because she was extremely beautiful, but also because she came from money. If Brian could be with Audrey, he would not have to work for the rest of his life. Therefore, there was no problem for Audrey to pay for this bottle of wine. Audrey glanced at Brian and said calmly, first of all, Gerald is much richer than my father second. I am willing to give him money. It's none of your business. Brian's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and looked at Gerald. If he were rich, he wouldn't have taken a taxi here with you. Dressed like this. Audrey curled her lips and said, do you think everyone wants to flaunt their wealth like you? Shame on you to show off your small salary. While they were talking, the waiter came over with a bottle of wine and asked in a low voice, sir, because the wine is expensive. Although it has been opened, you need to pay before drinking it. Gerald looked at Brian with a smile, then handed the diamond card to the waiter and said, okay. Then, Gerald took out his phone and showed his PayPal's QR code, saying, $40,000. Transfer it to me. Brian's expression kept changing. Gerald had indeed taken out his card. Audrey hadn't given it to him. Brian was extremely regretful. Brian hadn't expected Gerald would actually set him up like this. Tara and Sophia both looked at Brian. He gritted his teeth and could only say, my money is all in investment programs. I don't have so much cash. Gerald was amused. He looked at Brian with a smile and asked, after hearing what you said, I thought you had tens of millions of dollars. 1. Brian's face turned livid. Now it was his turn to feel humiliated. Brian wanted to find a hole to hide in. How about this? Gerald looked at him with a smile. You suggested we buy the red wine, and I agreed we two would split the bill. Now, the red wine has been opened. You have to give me the money. How much money do you have now? Just transfer it to me. As for the rest of the money, write an IOU. Not 1 cent less. Brian sat there and did not dare to speak at all. He obediently transferred $8,000 to Gerald and then wrote an IOU of $32,000. Soon, the waiter paid the bill with Gerald's card and brought it over with the red wine. He served a glass to each of them. Audrey raised her glass with a smile and said, for our reunion. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Since things had happened, Brian had no choice but to pick up his glass and take a sip. However, he did not feel the wine was tasty. It was very bitter, so bitter that he could not speak. $40,000. It meant he had worked his ass off for half a year for nothing. He failed to act tough, and instead, he was trapped. Gerald was secretly happy to see him like this. After a while, Brian really felt that it was a little embarrassing to stay here. He pretended to answer a phone call and then said the company needed his attention before leaving. After a short moment of shock, Sophia and Tara continued to chat with Audrey. However, they sized Gerald up curiously, as if curious about who Gerald really was. After lunch, the two had to go to work in the afternoon, so they left. When they left, Audrey said with a smile, "Gerald, you are good at this. You don't know how happy I felt when I saw Brian like that just now. He wants to take on airs in front of me," Gerald sighed. "I don't know what else to do." At this point, he smiled and continued, "Oh, you just said you were willing to give me money to spend. Why don't you give me $40,000? Bah." Audrey pursed her lips and then muttered, "But you did spend this money for me. Give me your bank account, and I will transfer it to you." Looking at her serious face, Gerald froze. Then he raised his head and rubbed hers affectionately, saying, "I was just teasing you." Audrey also froze. Then, her face turned red. She quickly broke free of Gerald's hand and ran to the side. She said, "Don't paw me." Gerald rubbed his nose awkwardly and said with a smile, "All right, what do you want to eat?" Halfway through his words, a sports car suddenly stopped at the side of the restaurant. Two people walked down from the sports car. One of them was actually Drake. The other was a beautiful woman. She looked like an internet influencer. Her figure was hot. After getting off the car, she naturally held Drake's arm and leaned on him. Drake didn't look happy. His face was sour. "Darling, don't be angry at worst, you can go to other companies." The people of Goldson Group failed to recognize a great person. Gerald heard the sweet voice of the woman. Drake snorted, "I will ask Jolie's mother to discuss it with Mason again. No matter what, we have to get Universe Group's investment." "Okay." The woman smiled. "Jolie probably doesn't know about our relationship yet. I don't know. When I get the investment, I will break up with her." Drake pinched the woman's waist and walked to the restaurant holding her in his arms. Gerald frowned. He did not think too much about it. He quickly took out his phone and took several photos from the side of the two people. Due to the angle and the fact that Drake was not in a good mood, the two did not notice Gerald. "You know them?" Audrey saw Gerald take photos and could not help but ask. Gerald nodded. "That man is my cousin's boyfriend." Audrey stilled and said, "Then why are you taking photos here instead of beating him up?" Gerald rubbed his nose and said, "Things are a bit complicated. You know my situation. After returning to Sacramento, many people have a great prejudice against me. If I tell them directly, they won't listen. They would even think that I am harming them." Audrey froze. Then she thought of when she and Justin or Tyrone had eaten in restaurants. They had been called rapists. She looked at Gerald and gritted her teeth. "Gerald, this place is so hostile to you. Why don't you come back to Los Angeles with us?" Sacramento is indeed a big city, but Los Angeles is also prosperous. "We will live a lot more comfortably in Los Angeles." Gerald turned and looked at Audrey. He couldn't help but want to touch her head, but Audrey dodged this time. Gerald smiled, "I do not belong to any city. I am just a vagabond." "Funny." Audrey looked at him with a fake smile. In fact, Gerald did think that way. Ever since he became a night watch, he had been wandering in many cities to carry out missions. Although he had returned to the city, he was just a powerful spy planted by the night watch. He would continue to carry out missions. As long as a new mission was given, he might leave Sacramento and go to any city. Moreover, he would return to the night watch. Night watch members were all vagabonds. And he didn't know when he would die. When Gerald had been at his prime 3 years ago, he had almost died and lost his memory for 3 years. The night watch hid in the dark, guarding the peace of this world. Audrey did not understand. "All right, you are a vagabond," Audrey pouted and said. Gerald chuckled, "What should we do next? It's quite boring this afternoon. Let's watch a movie," Audrey said. Gerald nodded. The two went to the cinema to watch a movie. Then Gerald thought about buying a gift for his grandmother, so he took Audrey to go shopping together. However, he did not know what to buy. After thinking about it, Gerald decided to ask Leandro for a house and give it to his grandmother. Ads by Pub Future. At around 5 o'clock, Doreen called. Doreen was off work and planned to hang out with Audrey and the others. Gerald had not had a good meal with his parents after coming back for so long. He did not choose to go with them and took a taxi back home. When he reached home, it was almost 6 o'clock. Just as he opened the door, he heard some angry voices coming from inside. "Mason, you guys are too shameless." Gerald walked into the room and saw that his Aunt Lelia and Jolie were both sitting on the sofa. Lelia was furious. "Do you think it is something that Gerald knows Jessica? It was not easy for Ms. Lang to be willing to see Drake. Just because I misspoke yesterday, you asked Gerald to call Jessica to refuse Drake's project." Lelia growled angrily. When Gerald heard that, he frowned. Obviously, Jessica was not interested in Drake's project at all. Gerald felt Drake was a little disgusting. Drake was not here. Obviously, Lelia and Jolie were called over by Drake, but Drake did not show up. Seeing Gerald, Lelia said, "Gerald, you still have the nerve to come back. What, as a rapist, you are having a hard time, so you want us to suffer, too? Why did you call Jessica and ask her to refuse Drake?" Her voice was loud, making Gerald's ears hurt. Gerald frowned, pulled out a stool, and sat down. Then he picked up Mason's cigarette case on the coffee table and lit a cigarette. Then he looked at Lelia and said calmly, "Lelia, this has nothing to do with me. If not for my phone call yesterday, Drake wouldn't have seen Jessica. Stop pretending. Don't you know what kind of person you are?" Lelia said loudly. "You are just upset that I found a good son-in-law. You don't want him to get rich. Do you think I don't know what you are thinking? You are jealous." If not for caring about his parents' emotions, Gerald would have kicked Lelia out long ago. Gerald didn't care if Lelia was family. For those who were good to him, he would pay them back double, but for those who were bad to him, he just did not want to deal with them. He took a sip, looked at Lelia, and said, "All right, whatever you think." Lelia still wanted to say something, but Jolie gritted her teeth and stood up. "Mom, stop talking." Lelia froze for a moment and then looked at Jolie. Jolie stood up and looked at Gerald, saying, "Gerald, let's talk alone." Gerald looked at his cousin, who used to follow him around, and nodded. "Okay, let's go down." Jolie pursed her lips and said. Gerald nodded. Jolie walked out first. Gerald looked at Lelia and followed Jolie out. After entering the elevator, both of them were silent. After a while, Jolie said, "Thank you." Huh. Gerald looked at her in surprise. Ever since Gerald returned to Sacramento, Jolie had shown great hostility towards him. He didn't expect that she would actually say thank you to him. "Today, we went to Goldson Group. Ms. Lang told me everything. We were able to meet her because you called her," Jolie said. Gerald smiled and said, "It's nothing. Don't take it to heart." The elevator reached the first floor. Jolie walked out, and Gerald quickly followed. After Jolie walked for a while, she asked again, "After you came back, we have always been so prejudiced against you. Why are you still helping us? If my parents didn't care about you, I wouldn't help you with anything. Moreover," Gerald said honestly, "I really don't like Drake. It doesn't matter what you think of me. We used to have a good relationship. I have to remind you that Drake is not suitable for you." Jolie frowned. In the office of the Zumthor family in Sacramento, there was a large group of people sitting. Henley sat afar, his expression sour. It had been 2 days, and his family didn't mention his marriage to Doreen. He was anxious, but he did not dare to mention it in the past 2 days. His family had encountered a great crisis. First, their cooperation with new bank ended. Second, their project was snatched. Those 2 things happened suddenly, and the Zumthor family was still reeling. Corbin sat in the main seat of the conference room. His face was gloomy as he swept his gaze over everyone and said, "Now, we have discussed cooperation with other banks and obtained 2 projects. The situation has been stabilized. If this had happened before, the Zumthor family would have suffered. But now, the Zumthor family was supported by Blood Lotus, which controlled many rich people in this world. Those people were naturally connected to each other. With the help of Blood Lotus, the Zumthor family quickly stabilized the situation. But this is the first time we have suffered such a big loss." Corbin glanced coldly at Henley and said, "Have you found out the owner of the diamond card from New Bank?" "Kiera was unwilling to tell me," Henley said with a bitter smile. Corbin sneered. He looked at Henley and said, "No matter what method you use, make her speak. Remember, any method is acceptable." Henley nodded. When he thought of Kiera, a hint of excitement flashed in his eyes as he said, "I understand."